Good morning, students. In our previous video, we have read chapter quality, page number 25 and 26. And in today's video, we'll read pages 27, 28 and 29. By the end of this video, you will be able to learn about the ambience of Mr. Gessler's shop. How did the Industrial Revolution take a toll on Mr. Gessler's business, and how did the narrator get to know about the hardships faced by Mr. Gessler? Let us read the text at page number 26, last paragraph. One went in, not as into most shops, in the mood of, please serve me and let me go, but restfully, as one enters a church, and sitting on the single wooden chair, waited, for there was nobody ever seen there. Soon over the top edge of that sort of well, rather dark and smelling soothingly of leather, which formed the shop, there would be seen his face or that of his elder brother peering down. Now children, let us see the meanings first. As one enters a church is a simile. Mark it. And the meaning of peering is looking very carefully. Now we all know that younger Mr. Gessler is the protagonist of the story. So wherever he has been used for the younger Gessler brother. Now this paragraph tells us that one went in most of the shops with an attitude of, please serve me and let me go. But here one didn't enter in that way. Here means the shop of Mr. Gessler. But here one didn't enter in that way, but restfully, as one enters a church. So when you enter a church, you enter with a lot of respect, with silence, the somber atmosphere. And his shop was like a church, like that. So whenever anyone entered the shop, he sat on a wooden chair and waited there, as most of the times there wasn't anybody there. Then finally, from the top, he or his brother, the younger Gessler, or his brother would peep down into his shop, which was like a well. Now, like a well means it was something, like dark, smelling soothingly of the leather. Why of the leather? Because the shop was of shoes. This means he came down from his workshop where he was working on his shoes. A guttural sound and the tip-tap of bast sleepers beating the narrow wooden stairs, and he would stand before one without coat, a little bent in leather apron, with sleeves turned back, blinking as if awakened from some dream of boots, or like an owl surprised in daylight and annoyed at this interruption. Now let us see the difficult meanings. The word guttural means harsh. Bast slippers are the slippers made from the fiber of the bark of the tree. Apron, a protective garment worn over the front of one's clothes. And children, like an owl surprised in daylight and annoyed at this interruption is a simile. That means the younger Gessler brother has been compared to an owl. Now, he came down with a tip-tap of his bast slippers, which would beat against the wooden stairs. He would come and stand before his customers without a coat and a little bent, wearing a leather apron whose sleeves would be turned back or whose sleeves were folded. He would stand blinking his eyes as if he has been disturbed or awakened from his dream of boots, or like an owl surprised in daylight. Now, this like an owl surprised in daylight is a simile. That means he has been compared to an owl. Now, owls are nocturnal creatures, and in the day they find it difficult to see. So his reaction showed that he was annoyed at this disturbance. While he was making the shoes, he never liked to be disturbed even by his customers. And I would say, "How do you do, Mr. Gessler? Could you make me a pair of Russia leather boots?" Without a word, he would leave me, retiring whence he came, or into the other portion of the shop, and I would continue to rest in the wooden chair, inhaling the incense of his trade. Soon he would come back, holding in his thin veined hand a piece of gold brown leather. Now let us discuss the meanings of the word. Retiring means going back. Whence means from where. Inhaling means taking in. Incense is the fragrant smell. Now of his trade, what was his trade? His trade was of making shoes. So what would people smell? Of course, of the leather. Now let's see this. Without speaking anything, he would go back to the place when he was asked if he could if he could make the pair of Russia leather boots. So without speaking anything, he would go back to the place where he had come from, or he would go to the other portion of the shop. And the narrator would keep sitting on the wooden chair, inhaling the incense of his leather. Soon he would come back, holding in his thin, even showing veins, hand a piece of gold brown leather. With eyes fixed on it, he would remark, "What a beautiful piece." When I too had admired it, he would speak again, "When do you want them?" And I would answer, "Oh, as soon as you conveniently can." And he would say, "Tomorrow fortnight." Or if he were his elder brother, he'll say, "I will ask my brother." So let us discuss the meaning of the words. Admired means praised, and fortnight here means fortnight, which means a period of 2 weeks. Now, when the narrator would ask him to make some Russia pair boots, he would bring him some gold brown leather, and he himself would admire its beauty, and also would ask the narrator when he wanted his boots. Then if he is there himself, if it is he himself, he would ask if tomorrow fortnight, that means a fortnight from tomorrow or 2 weeks after tomorrow, was convenient. And if he was his elder brother, then he would say, "I will ask my brother." Then I would murmur, "Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Gessler." "Good morning," he would reply, still looking at the leather in his hand. And as I moved to the door, I would hear the tip-tap of his bast slippers, restoring him up the stairs to his dream of boots. Now let us discuss the meaning of word murmur. Murmur means to speak in a soft and low voice, and restoring means taking him back. Now after the narrator had wished him good morning, and he would reply, "Good morning," still looking at his leather in his hand, the narrator moved to the door. He could hear the tip-tap of his bast slippers again. What does it mean? It means that he went back again upstairs where he was making his shoes. But if it were some new kind of footgear means shoes, that he had not yet made me, then indeed he would observe ceremony, divesting me of my boot and holding it long in his hand, looking at it with eyes at once critical and loving, as if recalling the glow with which he had created it, and rebuking the way in which one had disorganized this masterpiece. So let us discuss the meaning of the word divesting. It means taking away someone's rights. Recalling means trying to remember, and rebuking means speaking harshly for someone for doing something wrong. Now, if the narrator had been already given some shoes, the reaction mentioned above would be there. But if he was talking about some new kind of shoes which the narrator had not tried yet, he would take out the shoes of the narrator and observe it very lovingly, because this was also made by him, and he would look at it lovingly but rebuke or scold the person who must have disorganized it. Then, placing my foot on a piece of paper, he would 2 or 3 times tickle the outer edges with a pencil and pass his nervous fingers over my toes, feeling himself into the heart of my requirements. Now, after that, he would place the narrator's foot on the piece of a paper and take fresh measurements, passing his nervous fingers over the narrator's toes. He would deeply feel the requirements of the narrator. I cannot forget that day on which I had occasion to say to him, "Mr. Gessler, that last pair of town walking boots creaked, you know." He looked at me for a time without replying, as if expecting me to withdraw or qualify the statement, and then said, "It shouldn't have creaked." It did, I am afraid. Now let us discuss the meaning of the word creaked. Creaked means made a sound. The word meaning of withdraw is to take back. Now narrator remembers that he cannot forget the incident when he complained to Mr. Gessler about one of his pair of town walking boots which creaked. Now narrator was saying this to the master of the boots, that is Mr. Gessler. He could not take it, and he didn't reply to the narrator for a while, as if he wanted the narrator to take back his words. Later he said, "It shouldn't have creaked." When the narrator replied, "Yes, it did," to Mr. Gessler, see what was the reaction of the Gessler brother? "You got them wet before they found themselves." "I don't think so." At that he lowered his eyes as if hunting for memory of those boots, and I felt sorry I had mentioned this grave thing. "Send them back," he said. "I will look at them." A feeling of compassion for my creaking boots surged up in me. So well could I imagine the sorrowful long curiosity of regard which he would bend on them. Now let us discuss the meaning of the word hunting. It means searching. Compassion, sympathy and pity. Surged, a sudden rise of some feeling in you. So when the narrator told him or complained him about his shoes which creaked, he did not react as if he wanted the narrator to take his statement back. And later he said, "It shouldn't have creaked." When the narrator replied that yes, they did creak, to this Mr. Gessler asked if the narrator had got them wet. And when after that he lowered his eyes and started remembering about those boots. The narrator actually cursed himself for telling him this. Mr. Gessler offered the narrator to send those shoes back. Now the narrator could really imagine the feeling of sympathy and pity and concern of Mr. Gessler for those boots. The narrator now knows sorrowfully he would bend on finding the reason for creaking boots. "Some boots," he said, "are bad from birth. If I can do nothing with them, I take them off your bill." Once only, I went absent-mindedly into his shop in a pair of boots bought in an emergency at some large firms. He took my order without showing me any leather, and I could feel his eyes penetrating the inferior integument of my foot. So Mr. Gessler said some boots were bad from birth, And if he won't be able to stop that creaking sound, the narrator wouldn't have to pay money for those shoes. Once the narrator bought some shoes in emergency from some large firm, and he absent-mindedly went into Mr. Gessler's shop. Mr. Gessler didn't show him any leather like he always did, and obviously he wasn't happy. He was trying to wash the boots the narrator was wearing. Now, what is the meaning of penetrating? Entering through something. That means he was trying to watch the boots. The inferior integument, a tough outer protective layer. Here it refers to the shoes which he was wearing. Then he finally said, "Those are not my boots." The tone was not one of anger, nor of sorrow, not even of contempt, but there was in it something which quiet that froze the blood. He put his hand down and pressed a finger on the place where the left boot, endeavoring to be fashionable, was not quite comfortable. So finally he said, "These are not my boots." He didn't speak in angry or sorrowful or in a way of showing contempt, but there was something which froze the narrator's blood. He then put his finger on the narrator's left shoe, where it actually caused the narrator some discomfort. He asked if the boot hurt him there. See, what a great shoemaker was he. Just by seeing it, he knows that it hurts the narrator. "It hurts you there?" he said. "Those big worms have no self-respect. Brush." And then, as if something had given way within him, he spoke long and bitterly. It was the only time I ever heard him discuss the conditions and hardships of his trade. What is the meaning of hardships, children? It means severe suffering. He said, "Those big firms have no self-respect." Now the firms produced in large number, and the people could get their shoes at any time without waiting for them, as they had to wait with the Gesslers. And obviously they used the best quality leather, due to which they were also costly. So the people preferred going to big firms than the Gessler brothers. This caused hardships for the Gesslers, which he discussed with the narrator. "They get it all," he said. "They get it by advertisement, not by work. They take it from us who love our boots. It comes to this. Presently, I have no work. Every year it gets less. You will see." And looking at his lined face, I saw things I had never noticed before. Bitter things and bitter struggle. And what a lot of grey hairs there seemed suddenly in his red beard. So they here refers to the big firms. They, children, means they. So the big firms get the business by advertisement and not by their work. So the big firms took the customers away from the Gessler brothers. Those Gessler brothers who loved their boots. Mr. Gessler is quite dejected that he is left with no work at present, and every year it is reducing. So these lines tell us that how Mr. Gessler was aging up because of the worries he had. He had got a lot of lines in his face. So which lines, children? The wrinkles. He has got a lot of wrinkles in his face which depicted his bitter struggle. And also there were a huge number of grey hair in his red beard. As best I could, I explained the circumstances of the purchase of those ill-omened boots. Which boots, children? The ones he had bought from the big firms. But his face and voice made so deep impression that during the next few minutes I ordered many pairs. Nemesis fell. They lasted more terribly than ever, and I was not able conscientiously to go to him for nearly 2 years. Now, children, what is the meaning of nemesis? It means downfall. And what is the meaning of conscientiously? It means in a way that is motivated by one's moral sense of right and wrong. So, the narrator tried to tell or to explain the condition under which he had purchased those shoes from the big firm. Now, to compensate for purchasing boots from somewhere else and looking at the face of Mr. Gessler, the narrator in a few seconds ordered many pair of shoes. Now, to their downfall, these pair of shoes lasted even longer, and the narrator was not able to go to Mr. Gessler for nearly 2 more years. When at last I went, I was surprised to find that outside one of the 2 little windows of his shop, another name was painted, also that of a bootmaker, making, of course, for the royal family. The old familiar boots, no longer in dignified isolation, were huddled in the single window. Now, what is the meaning of dignified isolation, children? It means honorable separation. And what is the meaning of huddled? It means crowded together. So, when the narrator went to the Gessler brothers around after 2 years, he was surprised to notice that one of the 2 shops of the Gessler brothers had been changed. That means one of the shop was named after another shoemaker who was making shoes for the royal family. Now, those shoes which were earlier kept in 2 shop windows were now huddled up in one window. Now, inside the now contracted well of the one little shop was more scented and darker than ever, and it was longer than usual too before a face peered down and the tip-tap of the bast slippers began. At last he stood before me and, gazing through those rusty iron spectacles, said, "Now, what is the meaning of contracted, children?" Contracted means narrow. So the same shop which looked like a well to the narrator was now even more contracted and more scented and darker. Scented of the leather. This time Mr. Gessler took even longer to come down with a tip-tap of his bast slippers. Then he gazed through the iron rusty spectacles of his and said, "Mr. Isn't it?" "Ah, Mr. Gessler," I stammered, "but your boots are really too good, you know. See, these are quite decent still." And I stretched out to him my foot. He looked at it. "Yes," he said, "people do not want good boots, it seems." So he tried to recognize the narrator. The narrator said, "Ah, Mr. Gessler, the boots that you gave me last time were really good." Then he stretched out his foot to show Mr. Gessler how decent his boots still were. He looked at the boots and replied with a yes. But Mr. Gessler was a little dejected and said that it seemed that people didn't want good boots now. Now, for your homework, children, you will read the same pages and write down the difficult words in your copy. Also revise the theme of the story. Thank you.